Bonjour, bonjour, mes amis. Welcome to this evening's DNA Company webinar where we are exploring all things glory between the brain and the gut. And I'm very privileged and happy to be inviting Justin Harris, the most infamous. Good day, sir.
Hey, Dr. K. Hey, everybody. I'm really glad to be here, especially because we're discussing a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. Because I'll tell you,
Mm-hmm.
I actually, early in life, I had like this really long stint where I was put on antibiotics. And like I've told this story
Oh
before, but it
no.
was literally from
Yeah,
age 13 to age almost 18
me
straight, just
too.
because I had some acne going on where I was put
Yeah,
on antibiotics, and they did it in the
yeah.
absence of any sort of probiotic implementation.
Mm-hmm.
So it just wrecked my microbiome. And I'll tell
Oof.
you, one of the main things that I experienced for years after that
Yeah,
was just like monumental levels of brain fog, like
yeah,
just stumbling on words and just that whole thing. So I had to engage in quite the healing process myself, and it took quite a bit of doing.
yeah.
And I don't think I'm the only one in that boat. I think that a lot of people have different forms of gut dysbiosis, which is manifesting as cognitive issues, sleep issues, etc. So I'm really hoping we can make it our little mission tonight to help people kind of along that realm, because it's really relevant, and gut issues
Mm.
too are more and more relevant than ever nowadays.
Yeah. I'm so grateful that you shared that insofar as I think we hear so often about people having these sorts of issues and feeling the nothing's going to change. It's really wonderful to see someone kind of on the other side of that, right? I went through this long period of antibiotics and then my brain kind of sucked for a while, but guess what? I'm back and stronger than ever. So thank you for sharing that. I think we need more happy stories like that here.
Yeah, you can
Yeah.
totally reverse it, right? As long as you
Yeah.
have the right toolkit handy, you can reverse almost anything.
Yeah. All right. So welcome audience. And before we get started, so what Justin and I were talking about how we wanted to kick off this conversation around how do we get you from brain foggy or something that's sourced in the gut onto the other side of it is we actually wanted to start with a conversation of what exactly is the gut brain connection. Because at least from my perspective, it's something that science has really been only exploring for the past 6 years in at least the way we understand it now. And if I had, a penny, I don't know if pennies are around anymore. Are pennies in the US? Pennies are still in the US. If I had a penny for every time I asked a definition and got a new definition of what the gut brain connection was, I'd have a lot of pennies. So, audience, please, if you would take just a minute, type into the chat what you think the gut brain connection is and how it's achieved. Apart from the fact that we know it's going to be all in one body, right? How do we get the brain and the gut talking to one another? Please toss in some thoughts to the chat because I want to see where the oh, Michelle, love it. That's actually the first thing that I'm going to be talking about, vagus nerve. So Michelle's hit the proverbial nail on the head with one thing here. What are some other thoughts, audience? Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. The correct. Okay, so Nancy's saying it's really important as to the form of the bacteria in the gut. Love that. Seeing a lot for the vagus nerve. Morella, I hope I'm saying that right, is talking about the enteric nervous system, which is a fancy way of saying the gut as the second brain. Okay, we got a smart audience. This makes me happy. Yep. Yep. Yeah. So we got a lot of enteric. Okay, perfect. So audience, we're gonna go back to school for just a few minutes. But this is gonna be really, really, really fun school. So for those of you that have maybe seen me before on webinars, you all know that my goal in life is to become a cyborg insofar as I'd love to be part computer one day. And studying and the gut brain connection is a huge reason for this insofar as we know so much about the gut brain connection because of our increased computing power. There's so much complicated connection going on here. It's really byproduct of computers that we know so much more. So I'm really excited to be talking about this with you tonight because we really get to talk about the potential of computers and AI within healthcare. So let's start off by exploring how exactly are our brain and our gut connected. And the really neat thing is there's a lot of redundancy with how they are being connected. By redundant, I mean it's not just one pathway. There are several different pathways that connect the brain and the gut. And this really emphasizes how profoundly important it is, right? Meaning, if one system isn't working so well in talking, there's other ways that the gut can talk to the brain. That's how important it is from that evolution perspective. So, the first thing, and I think it was Michelle first spoke on this, is we want to think about anatomy. Okay. And the first point here is going to be that beautiful vagus nerve. So, a lot of us have heard of the vagus nerve as the way that the brain can kind of send calming signals throughout the body. It's really supportive of calming within the body, and it's a big regulator of mood. All right. Now, the cool thing about this is there is bidirectional communication between the gut and the vagus nerve, right? Meaning that as how the brain is feeling certain ways, it will let the gut know this, and that will shift how the gut is responding to bacteria, to food, and vice versa. If your gut is happy, it sends up through the vagus nerve, namely through things like um, metabolites, which we'll talk about in a second, but it signals to the vagus nerve, hey, things are great down here or not so great. And then the vagus nerve lets the brain know that, and the brain will adjust accordingly. It's really neat that they're kind of this dynamic system. So that's one way from an anatomy perspective. Okay. The next thing that we'll be seeing is, and I forget who mentioned this, but someone talked about the enteric nervous system. So we know there's a nervous system within the brain. We know there's a lot of neurons connected that do a bunch of fun computer stuff. Same thing goes in the gut. There's almost more, not more, but there's a similar number of nerves within the gut. And this system is very, very strongly connected with the brain. Okay. And they communicate again through a lot of metabolites, through the vagus nerve, but also through tracking inflammatory markers. The more inflammatory markers that are put out, right, the more that you're going to see a negative activation between the two, where one's kind of telling the other, we're not so great, we better tense up a little bit and get ready for something not great happening. Okay. Next, where I want to go through is going to be some more endocrine signaling. And this is really talking about hormone signaling. All right. So the first one here, audience, have we heard of the HPA axis? So this is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal gland axis. Yes, yes. So I'm seeing some yeses in the chat. And this is one of the bigger guys that people talk about when we talk about stress, right? Justin's beautiful in his explanations of this, and perhaps a little bit later you dive into it. But what the HPA axis does is it helps with a lot of cortisol. Oh, I see. Justin, you have a fan in the audience. You're great with your explanations, and the audience knows it. So HPA axis is one of that kicking off points of if we have stress, right? Um, and so specific to gut and brain, there's incredible connection between if something's off in the gut, it will actually send signaling up to HPA axis to go into that stress response and vice versa. This will happen through sometimes bacteria. They'll put out stress signals that the HPA axis will interpret. Okay. And separate to that, HPA in particular, when it's calm, it will support some more calmness within the gut. And some of this doesn't sound so specific, and please appreciate, audience, that right now we're just, science is at the point where it's saying, hey, when one system is activated, we can see, like if the vagus nerve is activated, we can see activity in the gut. And we're still stringing some of these pieces together. So I appreciate I'm talking a little bit in vagary, but part of that is because this is the first time, at least within science, we're really understanding how strongly connected, and we're still figuring out the how behind some of it. One of the more specific hows, and this is really fun, and I'm not going to pronounce this correctly, so I apologize in advance, but we have two types of cells within the gut lining. One is enterochromaffin cells, probably pronounced wrong. The other one is enteroendocrine cells, probably pronounced correctly. And these are both cells that sit at that endothelia, that first little bit of lining at the gut, and they're responsible for sensing nutrition levels within the gut, as well as bacterial metabolites. audience, hear this again because we're going to be talking about diet later on. You literally have cells that detect nutrition levels. And when you have nutrition, they tell the brain we're happy. When you do not have nutrition, they tell the brain we are not happy. Okay, so your diet, we're going to talk about this a lot, but it's these cells principally outside of the nutrition and the value that nutrition has for you. They quite literally tell the brain we're doing good. Okay. The next pathway that I want to talk about, and many, many people have heard this, is the incredible immune pathway, right? So we know that the biome influences, the immune system influences gut integrity. And it is through that interaction that a lot of signals will be sent up to the brain. And oftentimes these are just direct immune signals. So think of like, when we talk about the immune system has a whole host of armies, different cells that do different things, right? That is part of that communication network back and forth. Okay. So far we've talked about anatomy, nervous system. So vagus nerve, we've talked about the enteric nervous system, we've talked about endocrine, which is that HPA or cortisol axis, right? We've talked about those two fancy cells, which I won't be able to pronounce again, but the ones that kind of sample what's going on in the gut and do we have enough nutrition, right? And then also the immune system, right? That system that's inextricably linked to the bacteria that informs us, this is what's going on in the world, that will connect up to the brain and say, hey, there's a lot of inflammation going on, or hey, we're being properly taken care of. I can support, right? This connection here is really linked to neurotransmitters. And other pro inflammatory conditions within the body. Okay. And the last thing that I want to speak here is this one's more of a unidirectional. So the first three that I've talked about are bidirectional. They talk back and forth. Brain can talk to gut, gut can talk to brain. This last one is very unidirectional. It's from the gut up to the brain. Okay. And this is talking about metabolites. All right. So whenever you consume food or whenever we do something good for our gut bacteria, right, it's going to be producing, it's going to be munching up food and producing byproducts. A lot of these byproducts can be precursors to neurotransmitters, right? Precursors to things like GABA, right? GABA is one of our bigger calming neurotransmitters. Things like dopamine, right? That motivation, get up and get happy. Precursors or direct cursors to serotonin and melatonin, right? So, serotonin being that thing that feels like a hug and makes us happy, melatonin, the thing that's going to toss us to sleep, okay? So, our gut bacteria, our enteric nervous system directly connected to creating those things. Justin, hold me honest. I think about 80% of our serotonin is created in the gut, it's not created in the brain. True?
Correct, as well as your
Yeah.
melatonin, right? So this is
Yeah.
directly related to sleep issues as well. And I love how this is really a direct example of a biological circuit, right? Like you mentioned that a lot of these are bidirectional. So, I mean,
Yeah.
the brain goes down and the gut comes up, and they both
Yeah.
communicate with one another. And I really think it's important what you mentioned about the immune system as well. It's funny, I
Yeah.
was just talking to a patient the other day, and we were
Yeah.
talking about pathogen eradication in the gut, and they were like, well, why would you want any pathogens present at all? Because we were talking about proteobacteria, and it's like you
Yeah.
don't actually want to eradicate it all the way down to zero. And they asked me why, and I said, well, it's because bad bugs are a form of hormesis, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It actually, if you have just a little presence of a threat there, it can keep
Yeah.
those immune cells sort of circulating and on guard and ready to go.
Yeah.
What we don't want is an overpresence of those things causing the dysbiosis. So a little bit
Exactly.
of stress is good for you, folks, but a lot is not.
Yeah. Yeah, I find when people first get like bioreports or for example get 360 back and they see a little bit of a coli, they freak out, right? Because that's so associated with food poisoning and warnings from either the Surgeon General or whoever the health authority may be saying like heads up, this spinach is contaminated, be careful.
Yeah.
But within everyone's gut there's going to be trace amounts and it becomes problematic, to an extent based on this is specific a coli strain that you have, but separate to that, it's more that population. We expect to have a teeny tiny bit. We don't expect to have a lot. And that teeny tiny bit is very helpful, right?
Absolutely. And it also creates its own circuit as well, interestingly enough, because I mean, you were talking about the HPA axis, and I think
Yeah.
that was a really important part of gut health because,
Yes.
you and I have had conversations about this concept of does all disease begin in the gut? A lot of people
Mhm.
say it does. A lot of
Yeah.
practitioners say it does. I actually am of the opinion that the gut doesn't. I think it's the first thing that becomes like compromised when
Mm.
something else is going wrong in the body, but I don't
Right.
think it's necessarily an originator of disease. I think that it gets disrupted thereafter. But
Mhm.
what can happen is that when we have the stressor of bad bugs or leaky gut or any kind of dysbiosis going on, that represents its own stressor now,
Yeah.
right? Like the body
Yeah.
responds to external stressors as well as internal stressors. So let's say you have HPA axis dysfunction. You have way too much stress going on, and your cortisol and your DHEA ratio is way off. So you're in a catabolic state. That can
Mhm.
compromise something called secretory IgA, which is like one of the main defenders at the level of the gut. Once the defender is not there, well, of course, we're making way for
Right.
pathogens, right, to make their way
Yeah.
in. And now we have dysbiosis. That dysbiosis is now its own sovereign stressor, right? So that stressor, this is another bidirectional circuit, except for it's
Mhm.
kind of a negative one, right? It's
Yeah.
like a negative feedback loop. Now we've got bugs that are causing more cortisol because the body knows that there's a disruption there, and the HPA axis is what caused the disruption in the first place, and on we go. So I'll tell you, when I'm working with patients, I mean, I always work on making them eat in a parasympathetic state, make sure that we're
Mhm.
not eating things that are causing stress
Yep.
to the body. Taking that breath and just like being present with your food can actually make a pretty big difference, because I think HPA axis dysfunction is actually directly linked to gut issues through and through. So stress is a major mover there.
Yeah. I think interestingly too, so when you're stressed, your brain is sending signals to gut of I am stressed regardless where that stress started. And one thing that will happen, this was found, is that when you're stressed, your body will stop supporting and feeding the biome in kind of a helpful way. So, what do I mean by this? We have certain cells and enzymes in our gut dedicated to digesting certain fibers and spitting out sugars. And the sugars actually aren't for us. We can't digest or ingest those sugars. The sugars are quite literally for the biome to help encourage a really healthy symbiotic biome. And when you're stressed, your brain will literally signal to these cells that are making food for your biome, right? Kind of being like, hey, stay here. We like you. We're giving you food. It will send signals to stop that food production. And so there's an element of you actually start to starve to a certain extent your biome, and that can then shift community patterns. Right. And I think this is where, and I wonder if we can gently start to transition the conversation into patterns. Because I think when biome testing first came to be, we got really obsessed with what specific strains are there. Do you have E. coli? Do you have lactobacillus? If so, what form? Like, we got really bifidobacterium, et cetera. We got really strain specific. But when we think about the biome and we think about all of its constituents, there are millions, if not billions, of people there. And so there's a little bit of a falsehood if we were to sit there and focus on only a handful of millions or billions, right? It's kind of like saying, all right, I want to study the ocean and I'm going to take a cup of water and I will know everything about the ocean. Are you going to know something? Absolutely. You'll know a lot. But do you know everything about the ocean? Also, no. And this is the really cool thing for the cyborgs out there. This is where computer science has really come in and shone proudly, insofar as we can do these higher level pattern analytics of, instead of focusing on one strain and does one strain cause this thing or that thing, we can say, does this community pattern of millions and billions of viruses and bacteria and all the fun things, does that create a pattern that hosts specific diseases? Right? So, Justin, talk to me a little bit about that. What patterns are we, or I guess, what conditions are we finding pattern for in the gut? Ooh,
I'll share a funny way that I look at this. So it's like, you know how they say one out of every 100 people is a psychopath, and one out of however many people is a pedophile, and whatever it is.
yeah.
I'm taking this to a dark place right now, Dr. K. Um,
One out of every 100 people is also a Mother Teresa of the world.
yeah. So
There we
it's
go.
like You used a really important word there, being community, right? And if you sort of look at what your community looks like the town that you live in, there's friendly people and there's people that are asses and there's people that are kind of neutral. They're just there, there's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
different kind of
Mm-hmm.
personality
Mm-hmm.
types going on. And the gut is no different. It's just even that much more amplified. The
Mm-hmm.
reason why the gut has so many different forms of microbiota there is because the gut is actually really everything from mouth to anus, and it's like 9 meters long, right? So, like I use the analogy of the high dive. We have a swimming pool in my community, and the highest high dive there is 9 meters high. So that entire length is actually what your gut is comprised of. It's 9 meters. And the whole way along is segmented. There's like these little chambers that are kind of closed off with different sphincters. And each one has a little bit of a different pH balance in there. So some are more alkaline, some are more acidic. And that acidity variation, it gives rise to all of these different microbiota, because some of them can't survive or thrive in this pH, but they could in
Mm-hmm.
the next chamber, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you've got all these variabilities in pH balance, and it's causing these differences in microbiota. Um, so we generally look at it like we try to have a bit of a balance between these three different phylum, right? So we've got like Firmicutes, and then we've got Bacteroidetes, and then we've got these proteobacteria as well. Ideally, and this is based on the Human Biome Project, which I can't remember how many people they studied to get to arrive at this. You want most of your gut to be comprised of those first two, right? Firmicutes,
Mm-hmm.
Bacteroidetes, and you want just a bit of the proteobacteria. It's like I said
Quite a bit.
before. Yeah, we don't want zero proteobacteria. We want some of that in there, but we find these patterns, like you said, Dr. K, with
Mm-hmm.
people who have gut issues, that the proteobacteria tends to be really elevated in a lot of these people, and it becomes pathogenic.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people end up with any number of ailments because they have way too much proteobacteria growth in the digestive tract. So it's kind of a nuanced thing, because you can even have too many good bacteria as well that are out of proportion to the other good bacteria, good quote unquote.
Mm-hmm.
So again, biosis, right? We're looking for homeostasis in all realms. I look
Yeah.
for it when it comes to the nervous system. I look when it comes to the endocrine system. And once again, even with the microbiome, I'm looking for homeostasis. And over again, I see a pattern of too much proteobacteria. And I think that that's pathogen penetration because of all the things you already mentioned, HPA axis
Mm-hmm.
issues. A lot of people are just eating things that they're sensitive to, right? Food
Mm-hmm.
sensitivities, things that are
Mm-hmm.
causing an
Mm-hmm.
immune response, histamine and DAO ratio being
Mm-hmm.
off, on and on. The gut's very complicated, but again, this is a homeostasis thing. Like, a lot of people are just being kicked out of that for tons of reasons. More and more, I'm working on people's guts in a lot of different realms because I think it's a major contributor here. I'm sure you've seen the same
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. And I think too, I saw, I think it was Sue made the comment of I have a gut feeling, right? Because so much is sourced in our gut and we already know innately there's a connection. And I think this is really important to understand too. And we were chatting about this. Sometimes when people feel stressed or anxious, they can pinpoint the why behind that, right? They can say, well, my job's really stressful and I can attribute my stress to that. Or they can say, I'm not sleeping well and so my stress is attributable to that. And then there's another group of people that feel an anxiety or stress and they can't really attribute it to anything in their world. And this could be momentary, right? Maybe it's just for a few days and they're like, I don't feel good, but I don't have a reason why. There's nothing in my world per se that should be upsetting me. And to your point, this is more where that gut brain connection can come in, right? If something, a bacterial population has turned in your stomach, if there's another, like if there's an immune thing, maybe your body's thinking about getting a cold, you can sometimes feel that shift and that can create some anxiety, right? There's a phrase that I think, I think thankfully doctors are finally starting to toss out, but there is this phrase that's only in your head. And to me, it's amusing that while that phrase was very dismissive of a lot of health conditions and women for a very long time, now in the past 6 or 7 years, with this increased ability to study the gut brain connection, we're now seeing that, oh, that's very true. And while it was used dismissively, now there's a huge truth to that, that sometimes if you're feeling off, it's literally in your head, but physically between your head and your gut. Yeah, so I want to dive into some of the conditions that we see certain bacterial patterns creating from a mental health perspective, from a gut, like a digestive perspective, etc. But before that, audience, we have our poll, and I want to go through that. So for the frequent offenders here or the new offenders here, we Justin and I really only show up to support your learning and support what you want to know. And so we tend to ask poll questions at the beginning so we can tap into what audience wants to know. Okay, so our first question that we asked is, have you ever experienced digestive issues like bloating, IBS, reflux, all that? I call it fun things, and no one thinks those things are fun. About 50% of our audience, unfortunately, is saying yes, frequently. That's not even occasionally, mon Dieu. With the second category of people, about 30% saying occasionally. That is a lot of upset tummies. Goodness. Okay. So, next question that we asked, how would you rate your current state of stress or anxiety? Right? We've really articulated, Justin, you've beautifully articulated why the two are so well connected. Our audience is a little bit stressed, about 30% saying pretty high stress, 50% saying moderate stress, about 30% saying low. So we're seeing, at the very least, there's going to be some signaling between the two, right? And we're hopefully by the end of this, you'll develop some tools that you can mitigate some of that stress impact. The next question we asked is going to be, have you ever done biome testing? A majority of our audience, about 50%, has done stool testing. So straight up testing, you take a little bit of poop and you sequence it to understand what bacteria is there. 26% has done some food sensitivity. So Justin, to your point of things within the gut that can aggravate biome and brain. um, Gut integrity testing, right? So really looking at the gut barrier and how spoiler alert, the gut barrier will literally influence the blood brain barrier. So if one is off, the other will almost definitely be off. And then about 50% of the audience saying, no, they haven't done any of this. Our last question here is, which of the following is most important for you to be learning? We're going to take this back and we're going to make sure that we offer this in the balance of the webinar. 60% is saying all of the above, so they're asking for everything. Love it. But there's quite an even split between improving digestion, managing mood/stress, and then boosting immunity. So I think especially, Justin, I think as we talk through patterns, that will really be captured there, correct? Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. And a lot of these are really related to one another as well. Like I'll tell you, when we talk about stress, for example, like I really think there's a point to make here about what stress is, because it's not just like work stress. These are all different forms of it. But like, we talk about the food sensitivity testing in there. If you're
Yeah.
eating a food that you're sensitive to, understand that that is in fact a form of stress. It's just one that your body and your brain isn't going to necessarily pick up on in the same way. But
Mm-hmm.
it said that 26% of you done some form of food sensitivity testing. It's actually one of the main labs I recommend having a look at, because it's so crazy that a carrot might produce an antibody for one person and a piece of broccoli will produce a different antibody for another person. And there's no way to know this, because
Mm-hmm.
it's not an allergy, it's a sensitivity, right? You're
Mm-hmm.
not going to have some visceral response. It's not going to be eczema or, immediate spike in heart rate because of it or anything like that. It's more nuanced. It's like that little bit of brain fog, that little joint pain, I ate that and the next morning I had 3 zits pop up out of nowhere. It's one of those things that's kind of like hard to determine until you actually do one of these IgG tests. So it's like, to me, it's a no-brainer. You should actually have a look at that, because it's just a finger prick and you get it done and you drop some blood on one of these little cards and you send it in, and it gives you a big long list. Different companies do it differently, but you can get ones that have like almost 200 different foods on there. And you
Mm-hmm.
simply take what your current diet is and you just look at what's in the red, look at what's in the yellow, look at what's in the green, and you just take away those first 2 categories. Zoop, everything that's in the green, my body has no antibody immunological response to. And I've seen a lot of great healing take place just from the eradication of food
Yeah.
sensitivities. And you would have no idea, because if you eat a giant salad with 10 different things in there, which is probably a
Mm-hmm.
good idea for alpha diversity and different things. I know
Yeah.
Dr. K is the vegetable queen, so she knows lots about that. But what if one of them is causing an immune response, an inflammatory response in the gut? Well, that's a
Yeah.
stressor that you didn't really
Mhm.
know. You thought you were getting benefits, and instead there was a downside to it. So, personally, I'm a big fan of that food sensitivity testing as a way of understanding what's stressing your body out.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think at the beginning too, we outlined how many different access points that sort of those inflammatory markers would have to going up to the brain. Right. So let's talk through some patterns and how we can leverage the gut, both as a way of, I don't want to say diagnosing, that's not true, but a way of identifying risk towards certain disease patterns. Okay. So think about this again. We take that stool sample and we sequence it and we find out all the bacteria that's there and how much approximately of that bacteria there is. And when you do analytics on that, based on those patterns, right? Who's there, who's not there, okay? We are able to strongly correlate to conditions of anxiety and depression, to conditions of dementia. And so dementia is kind of that umbrella term, will include Alzheimer's within there. We can see patterns within Parkinson's or MS. So this is all from just that mood and cognitive function side of things. If we move down into the gut, we can also identify IBS, IBD, right? So kind of very gut based things, especially IBS, which for the longest time was, again, it's just in your head, it's not real. And now we're kind of coming back and being like, okay, sure, maybe it's real now, right? We can also see a lot of MSK patterns, pain patterns, right? Especially some joint and different autoimmune conditions. All of this can be found within different patterns of of bacteria within a person. And I saw Dirk asked a question because I think I made mention of, before we would just focus on one or two species, and now we're kind of expanding it because computers help us. So Dirk, he's asking, aren't there keystone species that need to be present for health? Right. And by and large, yes, right. By and large, you think of like bifidobacteria, lactobacillus, all those fun things. Those were the forerunners, right? The ones that, because they were large populations and always higher in healthy people, we believed that that family needed to be there. And that still remains true, right? The question is, what are their proportions and how is that relative to the neighbors? Because to Justin's analogy with that community, right? Within the community, you want a majority to kind of be your happy go lucky citizen. You want a few overachievers, and then naturally you're going to have a few bad guys, but the overachievers and the happy go lucky folk are able to keep them in check, right? The problem becomes when those populations start to shift. Yeah. Thoughts, Justin?
Yeah, and there's when it comes to like neurotransmitters, especially. I mean, we know that there's
Yeah.
definitely different strains that are influential there, like Bacillus and Serratia, I think is how it's pronounced. It can increase dopaminergic activity in the body, right? So, I mean, we know that microbiota can kind of facilitate the metabolism of different neurotransmitters, and some of them can actually just create neurotransmitters on their own. Like
Mm-hmm.
another good example would be the bifidobacterium can increase GABA, like it can
Mm-hmm.
help improve that sort of pathway. um, we talk about a lot of different things. Akkermansia is a really cool one as well. I spoke about this, I
Mm-hmm.
think, on our last mitochondria webinar, because
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying this thing where you take urolithin A and Akkermansia together to create like a positive feedback loop to improve mitochondrial function.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of getting into the weeds with it there, but really, we're looking for homeostasis. We're looking for a decent amount of positive beneficial bacteria. And we personally, like with our biome test, I mean, we look at a few different candida species. Like we really want to be aware of yeast and candida overgrowth, which is really common, by the way, with anybody who's used antibiotics, because that's what can cause a lot of those issues with regard to cognition and things. So we want to be
Mm-hmm.
aware of that. But we this is a burgeoning area of science as well. Like we're learning all the time. It's really complicated. We don't know everything about the gut. Like, let's be plain. This is a very, very complicated area of the human
Yeah.
body that's almost, there's like 6 pounds of microbiota in there. And
Mm-hmm.
a million of them fit on the head of a needle. So you can imagine what 6 pounds looks like. And when you look at it like a complicated community, just like the earth, human populace is very complicated. The one
Mm-hmm.
inside of you is even crazier. So bear with us while we continue to learn these things.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I would offer it's for that very reason, again, not to be too pedantic or redundant about it, but that's why I think we're learning so much more right now as we're able to bring computers in, because computers are able to take that full 6 pounds and be like, cool, and play with it and understand what's going on there. Whereas our meager human eyes, it's not to say anything of you or I, we're both smart creatures, right? It's that we can't really appreciate that volume of number that computers can, right?
Yeah.
Which I think just makes where we are in regards to biome testing right now so neat and so powerful, right? To be able to take a little bit of poop and say, hey, within your poop, you actually have a profile that predisposes you towards Alzheimer's dementia. Let's look at what we can do to shift that profile so that we can shift that gut health, shift that connection to the brain so that you are not going down that pathway. And I think that's a really powerful thing, because if we have so tightly correlated this pattern with Alzheimer's, this pattern with depression, this pattern with this autoimmune condition, MS, for example, right? What happens if we know that in advance and then can start to work against that, right? It's so very important. Yeah.
Yeah, and also like when we take the leaky gut component into it as well, like
Mm-hmm.
I like we're talking about patterns here. I think that that is becoming more and more of a pattern. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I personally think I had that as well. You know, and there's ways that you can look at it, right? With zonulin,
Yeah.
and you can look at histamine DAO ratios and
Mm-hmm.
different things. I mean, zonulin it opens up the tight junctions that regulate that interplay, and if
Mm-hmm.
the junctions are just being left open, which means your zonulin is likely, elevated. It's allowing things in, and the human gut is really it's meant to be very thin. It's on purpose very thin, but that
Mm-hmm.
can cause disruptions and issues. Like there's a reason why your dog can drink the nastiest water you could possibly see, and the dog won't get sick. If you were to drink that same water, you will, because a dog's digestive tract is frankly tougher than ours is, right? So that mucosal layer is really thin, but when it gets thinned out that much further, now the allowance of those pathogenic
Mm-hmm.
species is just not being checked whatsoever. And
Yeah.
I think that everybody would benefit, for the most part, from some sort of protocol once a year or something like that for targeting the mucosal layer,
Mm-hmm.
trying to strengthen it up on
Yeah.
purpose with some bone broth and glutamine and possibly some peptides and things like that. Because I'll tell you, if you're trying to just cycle in probiotics, if the mucosal layer is compromised, they're going to have a way harder time taking root in there. So,
Mm-hmm.
on purpose, like strengthening that mucosal layer can really go a long way, because then when we add in these beneficial species, they have that much more of a chance to take root and colonize.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that, because I think you're getting to, I think a lot of people, and I've seen a few questions about this. They're like, hey, so can I just take a probiotic and this will fix things, right? Because I think we in the West have this idea of if it comes in a pill, it will fix us and we don't have to do much else.
Yeah.
And um, the literature around probiotics, if you dive into it, is very controversial. Sometimes studies will find amazing results, and then sometimes studies will find no results at all. And the big differentiator, if you spend the time diving deeply into those studies, is kind of the prep work that goes in. If a person is doing other things to support some of that gut healing, probiotics are a huge adjunct. If they're not, oftentimes they wash out as not all that helpful, because to Justin, your point, they're not able to anchor or be nurtured and keep within the gut, right? And so it's this idea that a pill can be part of the journey and support it, but if you're not doing that foundational work, right, of healing that gut lining, of sleeping, of eating proper food, of reducing stress, they can't grab on, they can't take route.
Yeah, and it's really the terrain itself that you're putting them into is going to be very different, right? Like if I was,
Mm-hmm.
let me try making a ridiculous analogy here.
Love
If
it.
if I were to send missionaries to an impoverished area, they could
Okay.
probably do some good, right? They could do some good. But if I were to send those same missionaries to an impoverished area that was a war zone, actively at war, there's a lot less opportunity. This is a muffed up analogy. There's a lot less opportunity for them to actually do that, because the terrain, the area that I've
Yeah.
sent these people into is not workable. right? Like your gut terrain needs to be
Mhm.
accessible first. And it's the same thing with, I was talking about food sensitivities. Like
Mhm.
you can take a food sensitivity test, do a bunch of
Mhm.
high quality work on your gut, nourish it and fix it,
Mhm.
and then do it again a year later and have way less food sensitivities. And it's
Mhm.
because of the terrain. Your gut, if it's healthy and it's really balanced and the mucosal layer is right, you have the right amount of HCl, you have the presence of short chain fatty acids and different things that are anti inflammatory, then you're probably going to have less overall food sensitivities. But if you've got leaky gut and dysbiosis and things, you're going to be more
Yeah.
sensitive and have a lot more of an immune response.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Love it. All right, sir. I'm seeing some questions come into the Q&A. Is there anything that you would want to, you have so many Justinisms, any pearls of wisdom that you want to offer the audience or any thoughts that we haven't, oh mon Dieu, um, any other thoughts that we haven't covered? And for the audience's awareness, if you've been counting how many times you see cat butts, if you email the CEO, so CEO at the DNAcompany.com, and you say, last night on the webinar, I saw 3 cat butts, she will send you a prize. Audience, I promise this is true because we can't control my cats. And so we're just rolling with it and making fun of it. So if you want to email CEO at the DNA company and let her know how many times you saw cat butts, you'll get a prize. I promise. You get rewarded for counting. So, Justin, any pearls of wisdom before my cat interrupts us again?
Yeah, if you do have issues going on with regard to cognition, like I've been there, like I mentioned, and it is
Mm-hmm.
really frustrating. But just know that there is light on the other side of the tunnel. Like we can fix anything as long as we have the right toolkit. And adversity introduces a person to themselves, right? So how you react right now is going to define how your future actually lays out for
Mm-hmm.
you. Make sure that you take care of your brain independently as well as your gut
Mm-hmm.
independently too, right? Because these two things, like Dr. K said, this is a bidirectional circuit. It's a
Mm-hmm.
biological circuit, and they're both impacting one another. So the relationship between the two needs to be nourished and cultivated, but also you should do things specific that are good for your brain, and you should do things specific that are good for your gut. Bear
Yeah.
in mind here, we're talking about stress, we're talking about HPA axis dysfunction. There is no better example of the holistic nature of the body than the relationship between all of these things. Um, get a coaching program with me as well. Like if you really want to go crazy here, just because there's so many different areas to it, um,
Mm-hmm.
get a session or two and we can discuss it, because this is all based on clinical correlation. I
Yeah.
don't treat the DNA report, I treat the person, right? So I need to know a lot about your lifestyle. You lived yourself into this situation, we're going to live you right
Mm-hmm.
back out of it, but I
Mm-hmm.
need to know a little bit about you, so
Mm-hmm.
get all the info and press forward.
Yeah, yeah. If you're interested in working with Justin, or as Amy's requesting, emailing about cat butts, it's CEO at the DNAcompany.com. That's CEO at the DNAcompany.com. And Cindy, au revoir. Yes, there are recordings of this. I believe they're available on our YouTube channel. Okay. And Wendy, Sanjay, I love that you love my cat, so thank you. All right. I think we're going to transition into Q&A, sir. So, c'est bon?
Let's go.
All right. So the first question I have here, um, so Sue is asking, is it true that the gut-brain connection is the only two that talk to each other um, via a definite connection? Um, That is a delightful academic question. I suppose it depends, right? Because I would say the brain through its endocrine system talks to, that's a very academic question. I think the brain through its endocrine system talks to a lot of the body very directly. I guess it depends on how you want to define that. I think there's also a lot of connection between heart and brain. There's a few different systems, but I guess if we're talking, I think it's one of the more connected and more redundantly connected systems. Yeah, I would say there's a lot of magic within the body, though, a lot of other connection points.
For sure, the whole thing,
Mm-hmm.
everything influences the next. That's why I always talk about the butterfly effect analogy, like
Yeah.
everything affects everything else. But when we're talking about the nervous system, like there's the central nervous system, which is like the brain and the spinal cord, and technically the retinas as well, that communicates with a lot of things. The gut and the brain really rely more so on the peripheral nervous system, but there's interplay even between those two nervous systems, so like
Mm-hmm.
there's
Vagus nerve.
the vagus nerve, and then
Yeah.
there's nerve cells in the gut that communicate within the central nervous system as well. So there's, when we're talking about the nervous system, just understand that it communicates with absolutely everything. And the
Hmm.
more that you dial that in, the better. Like I've had clients that literally just from like a back injury have had issues with their whole nervous system because it goes up and down their spine. And sometimes just getting a chiropractic adjustment can help with things like adrenal issues,
Hmm.
right? Because that's what feeds the intelligence in there. I think it's like L5 and T8 or something in the spine. If you've had a car accident earlier in your life, it can compress those nerves and it can really start to interrupt the communication there that feeds the intelligence into the adrenals, right? So
Hmm.
there's connections everywhere. Just having alignment within your spine can influence the nervous system, which influences HPA axis, which influences the gut, right?
Hmm.
So I mean, everything is married to one another. It'll make you believe in a higher power if you don't already. It's just there's so much intelligence involved all at the same time.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that. Thank you for asking us a magical question, Sue. I value when we get to explore magic here. Dirk has asked a question. Does the vagus nerve transmit specific electrical or chemical signatures to supply information? And the answer is yes. There's some fun studies that look at uh, when the vagus nerve has some when it's upset, when some of its signaling is more stressed, that is strongly correlated with episodes of IBS. Vice versa, it's also found that when the gut is upset, and in particular the biome is upset, and it's releasing or inspiring the immune system to create a lot of pro inflammatory cytokines, this will quite literally signal and talk with and engage with the vagus nerve, which then sends some signals back up to the brain saying, we're not good. And that will then influence the brain and how it responds. So, again, bidirectional, and there's a lot of different signaling pathways there. So I hope that answered your question. All right. Um, so Nzinga's here, and I hope I'm saying that right because we saw you last week, and I tried several times for this name. Um, They're saying there's a lot of parasite talk on social media. Oh, goodness, this is going to be a great question. And the fact that we may be getting parasites from our pets. Is this true? Are pets causing parasites? Does the DNA Gut 360 test speak to that? And then what are thoughts? Should that come up? And then she's saying she's a dog owner of two. Um, so I would offer it's a little bit difficult of a question to answer because when we look at farm animals, when we look at when humans interact more with pets, we do see an increased incidence of that. Are we concerned about household pets? Justin, I'm not familiar with studies there. I know with cats, there is what's the critter that lives
Oh,
in cats that comes into people?
are you talking about toxoplasmosis?
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
A happy victim, happy and willing victim of it here.
yeah.
Um, but I'm not sure. Is there equivalent research when it comes to dogs there? I can look it up after. I haven't
I
heard
don't
anything.
believe so. I believe that one's more specific to cats, but I would imagine that. Listen, I'm an animal lover as well, and
Mm.
you say every night, "We're not letting them on the bed tonight. We're not letting them on the bed tonight." Yes, you are. Just yes, you are. But it makes sense that they run around outside and they
Hmm.
bugs and all kinds of stuff get on them. They poop and it doesn't always get completely off of them, and then they jump on your pillow. Like it makes sense that there would be
Yeah.
a little bit of a microbiome disruption or a potential for
Hmm.
parasites. But as to the literature, I'm not entirely informed. But that toxoplasmosis thing is a really interesting phenomenon. If you guys look at that when you want to check out some cool stuff.
just since you're teasing it, why don't we dive into it? So it's something that traditionally has been passed between cats and mice, and what it will do is it's benign to cats. Cats carry it, they don't notice it, but um, uh, when mice catch it, right, it will actually make them a little bit funky insofar as they won't be as smart. It effectively invades their brain and takes down their risk inhibition. Meaning, instead, if a mouse would have, stayed at the side of the wall to be hidden, instead it'll run across the room, and then it means cats can grab it eat it, and then pass that toxoplasmosis along. We're finding though that it's now in people's brains. And there are some studies that look at it does reduce risk inhibition within people. But I also would offer, I think it's endemic within the population. I forget the exact statistics. I forget if it's like 40 or 80, but most people have it. And it's not one of those things where it's like the like you're going to go running out into the middle of traffic with it, right? The studies really say people with it may speed a little bit more, that sort of negligence.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really interesting though to think about like risk taking behavior and like who would have thought that that would be what could be a potential contributor there. Just owning cats.
Yeah. Owning gods, whatever. It comes with risks. It's not our fault. So to go back, though, to circle back to Nazinga's question, I think there is a lot of talk about parasites on social media. And oftentimes it's to the end of, please buy my parasite cleanse. Be very, very mindful of chasing down parasites without diagnostic confirmation. Typically, that will come from a stool test. And the reason I say this, I see a lot of people. So, Justin talked about in the beginning, he, for a medical condition, however ill informed doctors were at the time, was on antibiotics for a really long time. And that messed up his gut. And that messing up of gut caused a lot of brain fog. The parasite protocols tend to be a very similar, although they're herbal, not prescription, they are herbal antibiotic prescriptions. And they're very, very, very strong ones because if you truly do have that, getting rid of parasites is difficult. And so they're trying to hawk out effectively very strong antibiotics. And that parasite cleanse is not specific to whatever parasite that social media person is telling you have in your gut. It will wipe out everything within your gut, and usually a bit better than antibiotics because with plants, they have multiple ways of getting rid of bacteria versus with antibiotics is usually just one mechanism. It's not as broad spectrum. So you can really hurt yourself by doing this. So my encouragement to you would be find a practitioner. If you want to talk to us, please do. We're happy to run through this. We can do stool tests. We can also do parasite testing. Some testing will do both. Okay. Establish if it's there or not, and then walk you through the appropriate protocol. Most of the time, I think when people are nervous about parasites, it tends to be a little bit more of an IBS or a dysbiosis picture. And so, again, travel history, things like that might influence what was going on there. But I'd really encourage if you're thinking about doing that, please go to a practitioner first, because I've seen a lot of people harm themselves by taking really strong herbal antibiotics.
Yeah,
Just
well, and
saying.
I'm really cautious, when it comes to that whole thing because this is exactly where clinical correlation matters.
Yeah.
Because if we just identify, oh, there's a bug, and let's just zoom in on that, but we don't recognize that through clinically correlating, there was some mold in the environment, and like I really try to treat the body holistically. And just understand what may have caused that pathogen, penetration in the first place. And doing the entirety of the gut map really matters because we also
Mm-hmm.
need to look at like, are you also really low for some of these beneficial species?
Mm-hmm.
There's too much going on to just like aim and let's seek and destroy this one thing. Like I want to know how you've lived, what's your diet like, all kinds of stuff, the environment. We treat the whole person. That's our entire goal. So I never like treat one thing. That's what other practitioners do, like they
Yeah.
zoom in and they work from the symptom backwards, and I do the general
Mm-hmm.
specific thing, and I think it works a lot better and outperforms specific treatments.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's brilliantly put. I think a lot of people in social media, unfortunately, are going to try and back you into a specific condition that can be fixed with a specific thing, as opposed to figuring out what you actually have and then what would actually work for it. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. David has our next question. And I'll take a first stab at this, and then Justin, if maybe you want to ground me afterwards. David's asking, is taking a probiotic good? Is what one is with the best strains? So I think, David, we did talk a little bit about first reinforcing that terrain, and I want to emphasize that. One other thing I'd also recommend, and I hate to keep coming back to this, but I think it's really important for people to understand this. Um, there's been a lot of really beautiful, elegant research that says if you have this condition, this taking this strain is shown to help improve it because we've done a lot of association between this condition and a lack of this strain. whatever it might be. Oftentimes it's a lactobacillus or a bifidobacterium, but there's other guys that, like the I can't say that one. Can you say that for me?
Akkermansia. Yeah.
Thank you. That one. So there's a lot of specific strains for specific conditions. This said, I think also because we're getting more advanced in the pattern based research of the biome and the correlation between within a community what is going to be best received, sometimes a biome test and some prediction as to what strain might be best for you is very helpful. Okay, because there's always been instances where we as a practitioner, I really bring this back to the beginning of my practice before a lot of this beautiful research and computer led science had been done. And I'd say, okay, if you're having this condition, why don't we try this general strain? And the person would come back because I was like, it's correlated to what you're going through. Let's see if it works. And they'd come back and they'd be like, I am bloated and I am gassy and I hate life and I'm never going to take this again. And it was by and large because they had a community population that was like, not today, and kicked that population out, right? Just did not jive well. With the testing that we can do now and that pattern analytics, we're getting a lot better at saying, based on the pattern in your gut, you will respond really well to the following strains and you will not respond well to the following strains. So I'd say if you have a very specific condition, right, consider getting some of that sort of testing. We do it in the DNA Gut 360 Premium. Okay. Especially if there's a specific condition you're willing to address, because then we can kind of shortcut some of that bloat and gas and World War III that might be happening. This said, Justin, for the general, like there's not something specific. Do you have kind of advice for David?
Yeah, I mean, earlier in the call I mentioned alpha diversity, right? So it's just like having little bits. And this is totally operating under the assumption that you did everything Dr. K just said,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because then you're just looking at the more generalities of it. What we want to be aware of and avoid is something called strain dominance. Like a lot of people that are like, well, this is my brand of kombucha and this flavor, and I get this one over and over and over again. And just understand that you're introducing something that's going to take root in there, and you may cause a dysbiosis,
Yeah.
even though you're taking in a beneficial strain. Like I mentioned before, dysbiosis can also occur because of the ratio of different
Mm-hmm.
beneficial strains, in relation to one another. So I don't recommend going crazy with like a small grouping of strains. I would recommend, if you're going to be talking in
Mm-hmm.
generalities, to take something that does have a little bit of a whole bunch of them, or even cycle different brands, different flavors, different types of yogurts or whatever you like, different fermented foods, and introduce a few different things in there. So I supplement myself with probiotics. I think prebiotics are also extremely
Mm-hmm.
important there.
Mm-hmm.
Your
Mm-hmm.
acacia
Mm-hmm.
fibers and things like that, because like the probiotics need food just like anything does. And if you don't provide the food, but you just throw them in there and your stomach
Yeah.
acid just murders them, then you're not going to be getting a lot of actual benefits out of that as well. So there's
Yeah.
HCl to consider. There's prebiotics to consider. There's different probiotic strains to consider. This is also paired with things like enzymes, and so
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of a broader map. The original
Yeah.
question David said is taking a probiotic good? And the answer is yes and no. It's just,
Mm-hmm.
there's more nuance to it. But I like supplementing with things that have the prebiotics added in there. At the moment, I'm on seed. I kind of go on and off of those ones. I think that one's good. It's got a lot of different benefits to it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's encapsulated as like two different capsules in one. And the
Mm-hmm.
outside is made out of some specific prebiotics that help to escort it through the stomach acid so it can colonize properly. So mix it up is I suppose the main theme I want to make. Like, do different stuff.
Love it. And I love, and David, I really hope you heard within Justin's answer too. Um, it's one thing to take the probiotic, it's another thing to take the food that feeds the probiotic. So, thinking a lot of the prebiotics, right? That tends to be a lot of your insoluble fibers. So, think of a lot of like nuts and seeds and certain grain shells, right? Think through certain vegetable. So, for example, Jerusalem artichoke, leeks, onions, cold potatoes. It's very specific to the cold, right? All of those things are going to go into the gut and act as food for bacteria, right? So you want to make sure you're doing that in parallel to consuming your probiotic because you want to have food for the bacteria that's there. right? You can't have a party without food. And so you got to have a party with some foods. Yeah. All right. Deborah has our next question here. Are there microbiome profiles connected to dental infections and cavities? Yes. Yeah. I think more though you're getting to like the oral biome, which is in like they're connected, right? I think when we talk about biomes, right, there's several and they're all beautifully connected. And so yes, there are patterns that are associated with that. But I think if you're really struggling with that, getting a good workup, both from a holistic dentist, but separate to someone who really knows how do you support biome within the mouth, because there's very specific practices that you'd want to be taking to ensure not only that you're supporting good biome in the mouth, but that, as you swallow, as that biome crosses and goes into more gut, it's supporting with different health outcomes, right? Not nitric oxide is one that comes. Justin, I see you nodding a lot. Do you want to jump in here?
Oh, I just think that it's really under talked about when it comes to
Mm-hmm.
digestion, like really paying attention to the health of your mouth. And,
Mm-hmm.
like even, your grandma said, chew your food, chew your food, chew your food. And she really wasn't wrong. Like a lot of people, that's part of the problem is they just don't chew it enough. Like, your saliva has enzymes in there. It changes the pH of the food. It really prepares it. It prepares the food to be digested later on. And our mouth is a pretty delicate microbiome. Like I still know people that use those mouthwashes that say big letters on there. It says kills 99% of bacteria. So anything that says kills in really big letters on the front, you probably shouldn't put in your mouth for that period of time. And I have several practices as well, but even that, like I'm aware of, using essential oils and things that have antibacterial properties. When I say I use these things, I don't do them every day. We don't want to over eradicate
Mm.
bacteria by any means. I really like tongue scraping. I really like coconut oil pulling, and I mess around with different essential oils that I'll put in there. I've also got this mouthpiece thing. It comes from Primal Life Organics is the company, and it's everything's organic and it's got like red and blue light in it, and you can alternate because it changes the bacteria in your mouth. Like you can actually do basically red light therapy inside of your
Mm.
mouth. So it's pretty cool, and they have like charcoal dental floss and all this stuff that I use for detoxification at the level of the mouth. But understand that that is the first stage of digestion.
Yeah.
So pay attention to it and give it its due respect. Like it's going to impact the later microbiome that the food ends up in.
You're such a glorious N of one scientist there, Justin. All right. So, Deborah, I hope that was a helpful answer for you. Sandy is asking our question. Um, Apart from food sensitivity testing and an elimination diet, is there a way to get a general idea of food we may be sensitive to? So, for example, blood glucose monitoring, pulse testing. Um, they're saying that they don't have any noticeable reactions to foods, but they do have an autoimmune disease, and so they want and so they're specific to foods based on that. So, for example, not eating nightshades, which is very popular within autoimmune paleo sort of eating styles. Um, and so, I guess the question is there, apart from food sensitivity testing and elimination diet, is there a way to know what's up? Um, I would offer yes, and this kind of goes back to that gut sense, right? I think if you're consuming something and right off the bat you feel gas, bloat, or something different, I would also say if your mood changes during that period in ways you wouldn't expect it to, right? Something bad happens and your mood goes sour, of course, expected. But if you have a meal, nothing untowards happens and you notice your mood sours, right? That can also be a connection, right? Is that as discerning as some of the food sensitivity testing, or and I'll be very emphatic about this. I prefer elimination diet. I think if you have the discipline, elimination diet outperforms food sensitivity testing. Just very difficult to have that discipline. So I'm very grateful for food sensitivity testing. So I think you get soft measures there, Sandy. I don't know if you'd get the firm, concrete information, though you would, because there's going to be so many different variables, right? We don't know how long it's taking to digest. Different foods will digest at different rates. There's going to be different bacterial populations, et cetera. There's a lot of variables. Justin, thoughts there?
Any step towards personalization that you take with your diet is going to be in your
Yeah.
interest. Like, I know people that do the blood tests or blood type
Yeah.
dieting, and have had some success with that.
Hmm.
Knowing your genes is great because you can understand how well do I metabolize starches versus lipids and things. Um, you can also utilize, like, the CGM, you mentioned there. The glucose monitor, I do think, is pretty useful because it's not necessarily about the macronutrients, but about the body's cortisol response to certain
Hmm.
foods, right? And it's a really wacky thing. Like, some people will eat like a nut that's perfectly ketogenic, and it will cause a blood glucose spike to go up. And you're like, well, that doesn't make any sense. It's fats and proteins. Like, there's very minimal carbs in nuts, a little bit. But there may be compounds within the nuts that cause a cortisol release because the body interpreted it as a poison, and therefore your cortisol went up, and therefore your liver released glucose, which ended up in the bloodstream, and there you go. So if you have one of these continuous glucose monitors and you're eating different foods, I think that can be paired with an elimination diet, or with, I know Dr. Laura loves the food mood poop journal,
Hmm.
that thing.
Yep.
That's a great strategy, and you
Yeah.
could do them all together, right? Like, almost a little
Hmm.
combination of all of the above.
Yeah.
Or there's another thing that I'm a big fan of called metabolic typing. That's another pretty
Mm.
cool little additive there. If I'm really going to work on someone's nutrition, I mean, you can do all of these things, right? You can be tracking it with a
Yeah.
journal. You can be using a CGM. You can use your genes. You can use your blood type. You can use metabolic typing, which gives you your sort of oxidative rate based on the work of Dr. William Wolcott. All of these things can work. I think that if you don't take genes into account, you're going to be amiss there, because even just your methylation profile, for example,
Right.
like, that's going to matter.
Yeah.
It's going to dictate how your body
Hmm.
metabolizes nutrients, right? We need to know
Hmm.
all of these things. But to answer your question, doing that with food sensitivity, all of the
Hmm.
above, if you're really concerned that you're eating something that's not right for you, do it all. Throw the kitchen sink at it, because you eat every day. Everything eats, right? So if you're eating something that's contributing to a condition, then yeah, you need to get to the bottom of that, and we would be happy to help you as well.
Yeah. Two questions to kind of round this out for you, Justin. A lot of people are asking, can you recommend a food sensitivity test? Do you have a preferred provider there? So audience, just for awareness, you'll probably a lot of the tests we'd recommend in this space, you'll probably need requisitions from a doctor. They're not going to be commercially available. Commercially meaning like you can go to a website and get them. So if you want support getting them, don't hesitate to reach out. We can facilitate that. Do you have a preferred food sensitivity test?
Yeah, so it depends where you are, right? Like, there's different availability, and
Geography matters. Yeah.
geography matters, and I'm only aware of the North American ones, so
Yeah.
apologies to anyone in the audience that's in Europe or wherever. In Canada, there's one called Mosaic Diagnostics,
They're in the
IgG.
US too. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So that's the one I did.
Hmm.
Uh, by the way, I've only got like a couple things on there. I'm really proud of how far I've come with my gut. Yeah,
Look at you
sesame
being
seeds and like one more
fancy.
thing. Yeah, that's
Look
it.
at you being
Uh,
so fancy. I love it.
yeah, I mean, I've done, a lot of work on it. That's
You
what I was talking about
have.
earlier. You can improve the terrain and reduce the issues there. So Mosaic Diagnostics, that's
Yeah.
great. Or in the United States, there's another one called Oxford MRT. So
Mm,
it's like a mediator release test, and it's, these are
mm,
all IgG tests as well.
yeah.
So there's different immunoglobulins that you can look at: IgG, IgA, IgE, and some of them are relative to more
Mm,
allergies, which you would probably know anyways. But IgG is the one you want to zoom in a little bit on it there, because it's really food sensitivities, like I mentioned
yeah.
earlier. So I recommend that. But yeah, Dr. K is right. You need a requisition form for these, but we
Hmm.
can facilitate that as well.
Yeah. Have you used the all test before?
Never.
AL. Yeah. I like that one, but yeah, a little bit. Yeah. Okay. All right. Just to kind of continue this, Cheryl's asking, and you've already indirectly answered this, and I will indirectly answer it as well. But Cheryl's asking, can food sensitivities change over time?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, they can. Yeah. It's
You're a
all a
walking
matter
case
of,
in point of that. Yeah.
yeah, because I'm sure that I had a lot more before, and now there's way less. So it's like, again, if you're running around with leaky gut, a lot of things are going to be reactive right there. But the more that you improve that terrain, it's going to be less and less. You're probably still always going to have some things that you need to just avoid. And even
Mm-hmm.
genetically, right, we can point to that, like lactose tolerance, or like we have the HLA family of genes that's relative to gluten
Yeah.
sensitivity and things. So there's some things you're probably just going to have to avoid forever. But I do honestly believe, and I have seen it, that you can, in fact, reduce your number of food sensitivities with appropriate gut microbiome
Mm-hmm.
protocols.
Yeah. Agreed. Agreed. And I think the most marked cases of this, to your point, are people who are celiac. And while they're celiac, they're sensitive to absolutely everything.
Yeah.
And then once they truly take out gluten, right, that shifts in the future. Once they've done that healing, that shifts what they're sensitive to, and they're not going to be as sensitive to everything. They tend to be the most marked cases.
Yeah.
But over time, based on environment, et cetera, you'll absolutely change that stuff. It's very, very, very beautifully modifiable. The body is so resilient, and this is one of the places where body can be most resilient. Yeah. All right. Our next question is from Nazinga. Can you talk about food sensitivity and infertility? Is there a correlation? I'm not up on such fertility research. This said, there is a connection between fertility and inflammation, and exposing yourself to foods you are sensitive to and kind of creating a more inflammatory environment can lessen outcomes. I don't know, though, on the scale of things where food sensitivity sits. I haven't dove into that literature. So my answer is yes. The one thing I will qualify, though, is I haven't done that literature dive to really say, is this something that is a game changer, right, or not? I would offer it something, though, in terms of general health, right? For fertility, we want to be telling the body it is safe and it is healthy. And so removing any inflammatory element, including food sensitivities, I would offer is really important. I just kind of want to qualify it of, there might be other things that are more important. And this is where working with a provider to understand what's going on in your body and what's going to give you the best return on investment is really, really important. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and the body really has such a hierarchy of priorities, and I think that
Yeah.
the more that it senses toxicity in the environment or danger in the environment, which can come in a lot of forms, I think it has a trickle down effect to how badly the body really wants to pass on offspring if it senses that the environment is really
Mm-hmm.
toxic. And I
Mm-hmm.
think food sensitivities, to Dr. K's point, we don't know where on that spectrum the body's going to
Yeah.
prioritize that, but it does recognize toxins, and it does recognize
Mm-hmm.
that we don't want to have kids right here if they're going to be in danger as soon as they're out of the womb,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
right? So I think it makes sense. I'm just not familiar with any real data or literature, but I'm sure, right? It makes a ton of sense.
Yeah. 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 All right. Wendy has a new question for us. So we touched upon vagus nerve. They recently purchased a device, a vagus nerve stimulation device, that was recommended for calming down the nervous system and helping with hormone balance, gut inflammation, detox, et cetera, et cetera. It sounds like they use it as prescribed. What are your thoughts about the best way to calm down the autonomic nervous system? So I like texteuticals to a certain extent. Um, so texteuticals kind of being devices like electromagnetic or light devices, any device that is used towards the end of an outcome. So in this instance, it's a little device, you stick it on vagus nerve, it stimulates, it helps with that calming. And I think for people in particular in life situations where getting traction in other spaces is going to be difficult, this sort of intervention is very, very helpful, right? If you're in a place where you're so stressed and your nervous system is so wound up that working on diet, working on rest, working on relaxation just doesn't feel achievable, these devices can help start calm you down in a way that is controllable, right? You sit down, you use it for 10 minutes, however many times a day, right? So I would offer this is a good first step. Is this alone going to calm down your nervous system? No, unfortunately not. But I think for some people, it can be an incredible first step. I think for some people who are doing a lot of other things, it can be an amazing adjunct, right? And remember, when we talk about calming down the autonomic nervous system, there's also a lot of really beautiful, powerful, free technologies think about breath work, right? Think about there's many different breath work, meditation, these sorts of things, especially as you practice them more and more, can be signals to calm down that autonomic nervous system. Emphasis on practicing, right? The first time you sit to meditate, the first time you sit to breathe, your body, it's a new muscle. It hasn't figured it out. But once you've got to that 100th time, your body already knows that routine. It's like, cool, it's rest time. And you jump into that state a lot quicker. And you can also call up that state, right? A lot quicker. So, for example, if you practice breath work a lot and you've trained yourself to calm down with it, if you ever get into a situation where you're anxious, you can start quietly doing that breath work, and your body's like, oh, cool, we're going to shift into a calm state. Treat these technologies like muscles, and the more you activate and the more you exercise them, the quicker you can call them in. I'm seeing Justin nodding a lot. Sir, jump in.
I just love the whole topic of like training your nervous system. I think that's one of the
Mm-hmm.
best skill sets anybody can possibly cultivate when
Yeah.
it comes to health and longevity. I mean, just talking about the HPA axis and how it compromises gut and all these different things, it's like, yeah, like your ability to control that system and that branch of the nervous system is going to make it so that you live a way longer life, because that's what kicks you out of homeostasis in the first place, usually.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's a big contributor there. So like I'm a huge fan of just state hacking, and I use a bunch of
Mm.
different stuff as well. Like I don't even get on these webinars unless I have my Apollo Neuro on, right? Because I can put it on the calm setting or the social setting or whatever, and it just sort of grounds me down.
Yeah.
And I find myself really just getting little routines in place to pull myself back into balance. Like I love brain tap and my PEMF mat and my Apollo. I love breath work. All of these things together just allow you to pull yourself back into balance. I think we're all too stressed in general, and I think that it's wreaking havoc on our health. So definitely, everything Dr. K said is legitimate. Friggin', vagus nerve stimulators, this Sensate. There's tons of different ones out there, but
Mm-hmm.
something to actively engage it on
Yeah.
purpose. That's going to pull your nervous system back into balance, and it's a great strategy.
Love it. All right. Tracy is asking how much is glycophosphate causing leaky gut? A lot. so, so for everyone's awareness, glycophosphate is an agent used particularly within wheat crops, but many different crops, um, as a pesticide as well as a drying agent. It's kind of when you manufacture plants, and it's shown to be strongly correlated to gut permeability or proverbial leaky gut, which then, as we've explored with the gut-brain axis, then sets off a glorious little cascade. So there's sound literature. I don't feel like I'm a charlatan or a conspiracy theorist by saying this. Unfortunately, there's a lot of literature that says it messes up our gut quite well. It's quite effective, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, they even say that with gluten. It's like, is it actually the gluten itself, or is it the stuff that gets sprayed on stuff that typically would have gluten anyways? It's like, if you get some of these packaged carbohydrates, it's like they're all
Mm-hmm.
enhanced with folic acid. We've talked about this a lot in our methylation podcasts. There's a toxicity limit there. They can be fortified with all kinds of different stuff, and they can be absolutely sprayed with preservatives, pesticides,
Yeah.
etc. That's a way for
Yeah.
them to increase the profit margin, right? Because
Yeah.
if you can make it so that this carbohydrate stores for a really, really long time, you're going to get a better profit off of it. And we can't have bugs all over it. We have to kill them. And, so glyphosate is really prevalent nowadays. And I think it is a contributor for sure.
Mm-hmm. All right, just another question for you from Wendy. How important is adding butyrate to a gut that is imbalanced? Do you want to talk a little bit about what butyrate is?
Yeah. So, I mentioned earlier at some point in this call about short chain fatty acids, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're pretty important, right? So there's different biota in the gut that create these short chain fatty acids, and they're really like these anti-inflammatory lipids. When we're talking about inflammation in the gut, those are it's a big relationship there as far as what's causing issues. Like even with the food sensitivities, I mentioned it's an immune response. Well, what's the problem with that? It's causing inflammation. Your gut, it really shouldn't be one of your primary sources of inflammation, but I think that a lot of people it is. So adding in something like butyrate, it causes the production of short chain fatty acids, and it's going to help with the inflammation component. I use a few different things to create, anti-inflammatory effects in the gut, and butyrate is one of those that you can definitely utilize. I haven't really seen any kind of contraindications as far as if you can't use it with different gut biota. Dr. K, have you seen any like issues with people using butyrate for short chain fatty acids?
No, just assuming they don't overdose. I see a lot of people overdosing on it.
Yeah,
More is
definitely
not
don't
always
do
better. Yeah.
that. Yeah, well, and also that's part of the entire constellation of gut strategies, though, is one thing I will say. Like, it's not just a one and done thing either, right? Just
Mm,
like with the probiotics, we don't just simply
mm,
add something and then there you go, we've created it. Why do we need short chain fatty acids to deal with the inflammation? There's probably something causing inflammation. So, once again, we treat the whole body holistically and we look at a lot when it comes to the gut. But I think butyrate is a perfectly valuable ingredient. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Catherine is asking the question, can we post the most beneficial microbes that we'd want to see in the gut? Catherine, what I would actually offer is when you do gut testing, if you look at the report, they tend to percolate those to the top because we know like there's certain families that we want to see populations of lactobacillus, bifidobacterium, etc. There's going to be a lot of different strains. So remember, those are families. There's going to be different members within those families that we want to see. And so that listing would be amongst the hundreds. So it's not really feasible for us to do that. Um, and so I would really encourage though when you do gut testing, right? Just going through that. Typically gut tests, I know ours definitely do, will categorize of, you want this and here's that window, here's that sweet spot. You want those elements within. So I hope that's helpful to you. All right. Doris is asking a question. Will an unhealthy gut cause heart arrhythmias, in particular atrial fibrillations? Um, I I have seen people when they consume, especially allergens, that impacting heart rate. I've seen people who, consume um, foods that are not favorable to them causing altered heart rates to the end of atrial fibrillation, right? I think there's other elements there, other weaknesses we'd need to explore. So I'd really want you to talk with your doctor about this. And if you do have AFib and then you're concerned about gut, really working with a provider to help balance the two, because with the gut connection, right? We know that it can increase cortisol. We know it can increase inflammation. We know it can increase all these sorts of things, which can indirectly put stress on the heart, right? And that can be an aggravator. But I wouldn't, based on whatever, especially given how delicate AFib can be, I'd want you to be exploring with your provider causes of it outside of the gut as well. So, can it? Sure. Are there other things you should be exploring and mindful of? Yes. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, more of a contributor than a sole cause, most likely, but could be part of the constellation for sure.
Ding, ding, ding. Or an aggravator, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, okay. So Cindy is asking the question, why is digestion so disrupted in menopause? Um, so a lot of that tends to go with, so within the gut, there's a lot of communication between hormones, um, as well as a lot of communication with inflammation. And given menopause for some people is so chaotic, that can disrupt the biome within the gut. And I am never able to say this, and Justin, you may be able to, but there's a biome very specifically connected to estrogen. Do you know how to say that long fancy word? The estrobiome.
Oh God, no, I don't.
That's okay. I if it's more than three syllables, I struggle. So there's a biome that is your biome is very specifically influenced by estrogen, and as you know, as we enter peri and menopause, estrogen will be decreased. And so I would offer, if you're noticing a lot of gut disruption, there's a value in understanding what's going on with hormones and then separately what's going on with the gut. It's a very complicated but very beautiful and worthwhile question because they're intimately linked. And I think as you do gut work, that will also favorably support that menopausal transition too. So I know that's a very quick and brief answer. I'm just mindful of time, but I hope that we're doing a webinar, or sorry, a She Summit eventually on menopause. Please join for that. And we've also done a lot of other webinars on menopause. And so digestion and gut are definitely part of those. So please jump into our collection of past webinars to see that. Yeah. All right. Jessica's asking a question. Further thoughts on the pets or the parasite conversation that we had, in particular around pets. Should people with many pets or farms use a dewormer on yourself yearly or biannually? Um, Please talk to your doctor and don't use medication to pull out items within your body unless you're sure you actually have them. I'd offer that's really important. If you are on a farm or you have a lot of pets, should you be having those conversations and those checkups with your doctor more often? Yes, but have the conversations be increased, not necessarily the treatment, because those treatments mess things up, right? And sometimes they're needed. You got to shake things up to get rid of things, but you don't necessarily want to be taking like some strong medication for something that doesn't actually exist in your body. Yeah.
Agreed.
Mm-hmm. 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 And I think that is it. Yeah, I think that is it. Justin, any closing thoughts for our audience?
Just take care of yourselves, folks. This is a big topic. I think that we covered it
Yeah.
pretty well, but there's always so much more. It's like when we're talking about just the brain on its own, there's a lot of complexities there. If we talk just about the gut on its own, there's a lot of complexities there. Understand here, like I'm really always trying to portray the holistic nature of the body. Everything works
Mm,
together. So
mm.
get your genes done, get your GI mapped, and make sure you're on the right diet and the right protocols for you. And I hope to see some of you guys in some coaching programs sooner rather than later so we can get you all as healthy as possible.
Yeah, I love that. And if I can plug it, I'll plug a computer. Um, get your patterns identified. It's not work that people can do. And so I'd really encourage you if you think you have something funky going on the gut or potentially within the brain, right? Given the connection we've established, looking at a product like DNA 360 or something where there's a computer analytics level, I think is so very important because it does the work that us meager humans cannot. Alrighty, I think the proverbial fat lady has sung. Audience, so grateful that you showed up. Justin and I show up for the sake of you guys so that we can share what we know and hopefully make your lives better. Justin, sir, I learn from you every time and I'm very grateful. I've now learned some fun mouth techniques, so thank you very much. I'm going to be taking care of my oral biome a little bit differently now, so thank you, sir, for being the best N of one scientist out there.
And thank you. I can't do this stuff without Dr. K. She keeps me grounded, so I appreciate you a lot.
All right. Likewise, I like the mutual adorations. Okay, I think we shall dance out because dancing makes us happy and that makes the gut even happier. So, au revoir, mes amis. Until next time, we'll see you later. Au
Thanks,
revoir.
everybody. See you on the next one.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.